They sent me to Capri when I was 17. The letter came sealed with wax, the kind only nobles and nightmares use. I was told it was an honor, that few from Rome were chosen, that I would serve directly under the divine Tiberius, son of Augustus, heir to empire, prince of precision and order. That's what the letter said. But the letter did not mention the silence. Not the kind you hear, the kind that stares back at you. When the skiff arrived at the rocky edge of the island, the sea was perfectly still. No gulls, no chatter from the oarsmen. Even the waves lapping the cliff base seemed to hold their breath. Capri was beautiful, and naturally so. White villas built into the cliffs, like the bones of a sleeping god. Cypress trees that twisted like dancers. But there was something in the air. The kind of silence you only hear in places that punish sound. The guards didn't smile when they met me. They never smiled. They wore Roman armor, but spoke no Latin. Only sharp gestures and narrowed eyes. I was led up steep stone paths toward Villa Iobis, the emperor's retreat, or his prison, depending on whom you asked. No one asked me. Inside, everything was perfect, in design, polished floors, walls painted with scenes of gods and nymphs, and oceans tamed by golden chariots. The hallways were long and curved, designed to hide sound, designed to trap it. You could walk for minutes without hearing a single footfall but your own. The servants moved in pairs, eyes forward, hands behind their backs. No one ever touched another. No one ever spoke unless spoken to. And even then, rarely above a whisper. We were told that even a cough echoed too loudly in the emperor's ears. I believed it, but I soon learned the silence wasn't just for reverence. It was for containment. The first time I saw him, Tiberius, I was cleaning the edge of a marble fountain that bubbled with hot water brought in by aqueduct from the mainland. He wasn't dressed in purple. He wasn't flanked by senators or standard bearers. He was barefoot, wrapped in thin linen. His face sagged like candle wax in the sun. Eyes yellowed with age but sharp. So unreasonably sharp it made you flinch. He did not walk, he floated. Not literally, but with a presence so heavy, it bent the world around him. He said nothing as he passed me, but he looked directly into my face. And in that instant, I understood. I had not come to serve a man. I had come to survive him. In Rome, we called him Divus Tiberius, the divine. On Capri, the older servants whispered a different name, Caprimorgus, the goat. They said he kept goats not for sacrifice, but for other reasons. They said that at night, strange sounds came from the grottos beneath the villa. Groans, screams, laughter. We were told never to descend into the lower chambers unless commanded. I never was, but I remember the boy who was. His name was Gaius, a kitchen runner. Small, fast, eager. The kind of boy emperors forget. Until they don't. He was summoned one evening, taken by a chamberlain with no explanation. When he returned the next morning, he didn't walk the same. His face looked ... folded. He refused to eat. He never spoke again. 3 days later, he was gone. No body, no farewell, just gone. When I asked where, the other servants turned their backs. I learned that on Capri, there were rules unspoken, but universally obeyed. Never speak the emperor's name aloud after dark. Never look behind you in the corridor past the fourth arch. Never follow the laughter you hear at night. And above all, never ask what happens in the piscine. I'll tell you more of that later. For now, understand this. Capri was not a villa. It was a labyrinth designed by a man who had tired of power and sought pleasure in its most grotesque form. They say Tiberius retreated here to escape Rome's poison. That after the death of his son Drusus, after Sejanus's betrayal, after his mother Livia's constant manipulation, he wanted peace. They say the island was his sanctuary. But what I saw was not peace. It was a man unraveling in private. A man no longer bound by senate or gods or even shame. On the mainland, Rome danced in marble forums, but here, in silence, the emperor played games that would scar the world long after his body turned to dust. There were statues everywhere, marble, bronze, some older than Rome itself, standing in courtyards, tucked into alcoves, carved into fountains. You could never walk more than a few steps in Villa Iobis without a face watching you. Apollo, Dionysus, Priapus, gods of beauty, excess, and virility. But they weren't there for worship, they were mirrors, they were witnesses. And over time, I realized they were stage props. The halls of Capri were not a palace, they were a theatre. And Tiberius, once a soldier, once a statesman, had become something far darker. A director of appetites. The first time I entered the Emperor's Special Gallery, the private wing known only to a select few, I was delivering towels, nothing more. I was told to knock, then wait, then enter slowly, keeping my head bowed. What I saw still haunts me. The room was circular, the ceiling domed, painted like nightfall. In the center, a basin of warm water scented with rare flowers from Parthia. Around it, divans, cushions, and figures reclining in unnatural stillness. 3 boys no older than 10, sitting in silence. 2 girls with shaved heads, their eyes dark, empty, trained to avoid contact. Their bodies wrapped in gauze, as if preparing for burial. Tiberius stood barefoot, wearing only a silk robe. He moved among them, not speaking, only pointing, gesturing, correcting posture like a sculptor dissatisfied with the clay. Behind him, a statue of Pan and Daphnis, grotesquely exaggerated, watched with a smile far too wide. He didn't look at me. He never did when these things happened. I was invisible. I was supposed to be. But the statues looked, and I saw what they saw. Tiberius would bathe with them. He would instruct them like musicians. To perform acts so far removed from the gods that even mentioning them aloud feels like a sin. He called it training innocence, as though he believed it artistic. There was no pleasure on his face, no joy, just obsession. A desire to undo purity, not just witness it. That was when I learned about the term the sailors whispered. Minnow game. It referred to how the emperor would lure children into the shallow pools and have them play beneath the surface. He believed it restored his youth. Some were trained to nibble, to hold their breath for impossible lengths of time, to smile as if it were a game. It wasn't a game. It was ritualized annihilation of innocence, and everyone around him let it happen. The guards, they were silent, the chamberlains. They only fetched what he asked. And those of us on the lowest rungs, we saw more than anyone, because we were always cleaning, scraping, carrying, erasing footprints, changing linens, wiping away the shame, but never speaking of it. If we spoke, we vanished. One day, I made the mistake of staring too long at a statue of Apollo behind the emperor's private bath. It was carved delicately, with the god holding a lyre and one hand outstretched. Tiberius caught me looking. He asked me what I saw. I froze. I said the statue was beautiful. He smiled faintly, then told me that Apollo's beauty came from perfect obedience to higher desires. He said, "A body is a shell, a form. Its virtue lies in how it surrenders to something greater." Then he walked away. Later that evening, I found the statue's lyre broken, replaced with a flute. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Everything on Capri could be adjusted. Every body was a tool, every face a canvas. Even the gods themselves were resculpted to fit the emperor's fantasies. Some said the emperor was mad. Others said he was haunted. But I believe this. He was aware. Everything he did was calculated, measured, ritualized. He wasn't driven by impulse. He was driven by control. And the statues, they stood not just to witness, but to immortalize. He believed himself a god among marble gods. But what he truly built on Capri wasn't a temple. It was a museum of perversion, curated by his own hands. And we, the servants, the children, the silenced, we were his exhibits. There were things on Capri even the sea refused to wash clean. things that happened below the villas, in the grottos carved into the cliffs. Damp hollows where the light could not reach, and no priest dared bless. We called them the piscinae, the emperor's private pools. But water wasn't what made them infamous. You reached them through a narrow staircase hidden behind the wine cellar. No torches were allowed, only oil lamps. The air grew colder with each step. The walls were slick, the sound of water echoing in stone. I descended only once. That was enough. It was the night I was assigned to carry amphorae of perfumed oils, imported from Arabia, thick and sweet like rotting fruit. The chamberlain met me in silence and motioned for me to follow. What I saw, I can't forget. The grotto was round, like a bowl carved from the earth's bones. There were braziers burning low. Steam hung heavy. In the center, a pool lit from beneath by glowing stones, or perhaps trapped sunlight from above. But the water wasn't clear. It was tinted, and there were boys in it, 3, naked, no older than 9 or 10, swimming in circles, smiling, not with joy, but with the practiced smile of those who've been trained to perform happiness. On the edge of the pool sat Tiberius. He was slouched, almost lazily, stroking a boy's hair like a man petting a lapdog. His robe draped loosely, his face unreadable. He never looked at the boys as people, only as instruments. I'd heard the rumors, of course, everyone had. They said Tiberius trained boys to behave like fish, to paddle around his feet, to take commands like animals. They called it the minnow game, a harmless euphemism for something that stole souls. I had dismissed it, believed it was exaggeration, until I saw the emperor place a fig into the boy's mouth and say, "Don't let it drop." Then push him under. The child disappeared beneath the surface, held breath, held posture, held obedience. And when he returned to the air, he smiled, gasping, but still smiling. Tiberius gave him a coin. These games weren't sexual in the way Rome defines lust. They were rituals of domination. The emperor didn't crave pleasure. He craved control over innocence, over will, over the natural order of shame. He unlearned them, made them forget they were children, forget pain, forget dignity. To him, compliance was the highest aphrodisiac, and nothing was more compliant than a child taught not to say no. One day, I overheard 2 chambermaids whispering in the linen vault. They spoke of a fisherman who had once rowed too close to the emperor's cove, unaware it was forbidden. The man had seen something, maybe the games, maybe one of the children screaming before the echo could be sealed by the tide. Tiberius ordered the man's hands broken with mallets, then drowned, not quickly. They say he was held just beneath the surface by 2 guards, while Tiberius sat nearby, sipping wine, watching, then ordered the body to be fed to the Murray eels. The guards weren't soldiers. They were dead men who hadn't stopped breathing yet. They obeyed not from loyalty, but because the island erased who they were before. Once you stepped onto Coppery, your past dissolved. Your family back in Rome, forgotten, your name swallowed by the limestone walls. Even your own reflection looked different under those flickering torches. I caught myself once in the polished bronze plate of a serving tray. My face was pale, older, hollow. I was 17, but I looked 30. The island aged you faster than time. Tiberius didn't always use violence. He didn't need to. He used isolation, shame, reward, repetition. Children were told they were special, chosen, holy. They were praised for pleasing a living God. Some began to believe it. They stopped crying. They stopped asking when they'd return to the mainland. Eventually, they stopped speaking altogether. And the worst part, some of them never left the piscinae, not because they died, but because they were kept, cleaned, fed, silenced, like exotic animals. Not prisoners, not pets, something worse. One evening, as I passed the outer grotto with empty jugs in hand, I heard laughter echoing off the stone, high-pitched, childish, but hollow. Then, splash, silence, a single cough. Then the emperor's voice, calm and low, to slow, little fish, then more silence, and I walked faster. Power doesn't rot from the outside, it collapses inward, until the man holding it no longer sees people, only tools. That's what happened to Tiberius. He didn't fall, he imploded, and Capri was the crater. By my second year in service, I began to notice something deeper than the whispers, more twisted than the pulls, or the laughter echoing in stone. Tiberius no longer sought pleasure, he sought obedience. Complete, unquestioning, humiliating obedience. He didn't want joy, he wanted confirmation that his will was absolute. The acts he devised weren't lust-driven. They were demonstrations of libido dominandi, the Roman term not for love, but for the desire to rule through domination. It began subtly. A boy told to crawl instead of walk. A girl ordered to kneel during every meal, even if she wasn't the one eating. Servants commanded to enter rooms backwards, never facing the emperor with their fronts unless summoned. If one of us made a mistake, a dropped tray, a yawn, a cough, punishment was instant, not loud, not violent. Tiberius would simply remove us. You'd go to sleep expecting to work the next day, and never wake up in your bed. I learned to survive by watching everything, especially what not to do. For example, never interrupt the emperor's rituals. Once every 10 days, at the new moon, he would retreat to a chamber behind the main library. Only his most loyal eunuchs were allowed inside. When he emerged, the hallways reeked of myrrh and burned parchment. The next morning, at least one servant would be gone. No explanation, no body, no funeral rites. Only a scribbled note erased from the duty slate. On those nights, I could hear chanting, low, repetitive, almost rhythmic. I asked one of the bath boys once, older than most, with haunted eyes. What happened during those nights? He said nothing. But later, he pressed a piece of tile into my hand. On it was carved a crude figure, a man with a goat's head, surrounded by kneeling children. It wasn't Roman. It wasn't Greek. It was something older. I never asked again. When the emperor did speak, it was never without meaning. He believed that language was a tool of seduction, not for intimacy, but for dismantling will. He asked questions like, what part of you still resists? Or do you think your soul can be separated from your body in this life, or only in the next? He once told a boy, trembling, naked, clutching a lyre, that shame is the coward's refusal to please a god. The boy didn't cry. He bowed. Eventually, even the guards changed. The island drew new men, not disciplined soldiers, but those who enjoyed enforcement. They didn't bark orders, they whispered them. One of them, Cassius, carried a rod not for protection, but for display. He wore it like a badge. I saw him drag a boy by the wrist through the wine tunnel once. The child resisted. He never came back. Later, I saw Cassius hanging a pendant from the rod's grip. A token taken from that same child, a bracelet, bone white. Tiberius rarely left the villa now. He claimed Rome had become a theatre of masks, he said. Here, I write the script. He believed the mainland was a world of illusion, and Capri was the only truth. A truth where he was God, priest, and audience. His rituals became more frequent, the games more surreal. Once, he arranged an entire room, miniature Colosseum, with a raised platform, where servants were told to enact mythological scenes. Leda and the Swan, Ganymede's abduction, even the dismemberment of Pentheus. But the roles weren't metaphor, they were acted with flesh, sometimes unwillingly, sometimes convincingly. At first, I thought he was insane, but I no longer believe that. Tiberius was not insane, he was transformed. He had turned the imperial crown inward, made it a mirror for his worst instincts, and found worship in the echo. And we, the ones who watched, were made complicit through silence, because on Capri, silence was survival and submission. It was the only form of love Tiberius ever recognized. By the 3rd year of my service, I no longer trusted the walls. Not because they whispered, but because they listened. Everything in Villa Yobis had memory, the marble, the water, the silk. Each surface had absorbed so much silence that it began to echo back madness. Not loudly, but subtly, through the eyes of servants, through the giggles of girls who no longer blinked. We weren't merely afraid. We were becoming what Tiberius wanted us to be. Things, ornaments, pieces of a stage called the Garden of Unreason. It wasn't a real garden. That's what made it worse. It was a name given to the emperor's favorite ritual chamber. A place behind the southern portico, flanked by ivory doors, and always guarded by silent men with spears made of blackened iron. Only the selected were allowed in, children, actors, occasionally, new slaves brought from the eastern provinces, chosen for their strangeness, their beauty, their inability to speak Latin. What happened inside was not discussed, but we all knew. I was never selected. But one evening, I was ordered to clean the chamber after. That was worse. It was shaped like a crescent moon, with cushions lining the floor and painted clouds on the ceiling. The walls were padded, not with velvet, but with fur, real fur, sewn from dozens of creatures, wolf, lion, hare, maybe even monkey. I couldn't tell any more. The center of the room was sunken. A pit with silk ropes, polished bronze mirrors, and something that resembled an altar, not religious, medical, scientific, depraved. The scent was unbearable. A mixture of sweat, incense, and something else, despair. It had a smell, and this room was steeped in it. There were streaks on the cushions, bite marks on the ropes. The mirrors had fingerprints, not like someone trying to see themselves, but as if someone had tried to hold on to their reflection while being taken. I scrubbed in silence. I did not cry. I'd forgotten how. They say Tiberius kept a record of every act that occurred there, not in writing, but through paintings. Not frescoes, living paintings. A Greek named Menodoros was brought to the island just for this purpose. He never left his quarters except to observe. He was pale, shaking, but talented beyond reason. He sketched everything the emperor wanted, then burned the originals. Tiberius didn't want them kept. He wanted them remembered. The emperor once said, during a feast, memory is the only faithful servant. Everything else betrays. He no longer trusted humans, he trusted ritual. And so, the garden became a place of rehearsed unreasoned madness sculpted into cycles, insanity masked as entertainment. Some said it was to purge his grief for his son Drusus, poisoned by his own wife. For Germanicus, whose death shattered Rome's faith in imperial grace. But I don't believe grief made Tiberius a monster. Grief only gave him permission. The servants began changing, not just physically, though many grew thinner, paler, twitchier. They changed spiritually. Some began to mimic the emperor, quoting his aphorisms, folding their hands like his, even pausing before they spoke, as if waiting to be told what to think. A few started laughing when nothing was funny. Others forgot how to use personal names. They'd say, "the boy or that one," even when speaking of friends. It was safer that way. Attachment was dangerous. Once, a girl from Alexandria tried to run. She was fast, smart to smart. She made it to the edge of the cliff path before they caught her. I didn't see what happened next, but I heard the screams. And the next morning, a new statue appeared in the atrium. A goddess, hands bound behind her, eyes wide. It looked nothing like her, but we knew. It was her, frozen, silenced, recast in marble like the rest of us. That's what Capri did. It didn't just kill you, it revised you. Tiberius didn't want obedience alone. He wanted transformation. He wanted to sculpt the world in his image, hollow, powerful, unreachable. And the Garden of Unreason was his chisel. We entered it as people, we left as reflections. It was after the Saturnalia feast that Tiberius first declared himself divine, not in the way emperors had done before. Not in marble statues or minted coins. No, this was different. He didn't claim divinity, he performed it. and we were forced to applaud. The courtyard was transformed overnight. A makeshift temple was constructed from silk and wood. Golden drapes surrounded a circular platform where the emperor would sit, naked, powdered in white chalk, with a laurel wreath too large for his aging head. Around him, slaves were dressed as gods: Bacchus, Priapus, Mercury. Their faces painted, their bodies oiled, their eyes blank. Tiberius, now Jupiter, would preside over orgiastic rituals he called divine revelries. We called them hell. It began with music, flutes, lutes, and bells played dissonantly, just slightly off-key, enough to unnerve. Then came the children, always children. They were dressed as nymphs and satyrs, instructed to dance around the emperor as he watched from his throne. His gaze never wavered. He studied them like an astronomer watching stars. Not for beauty, but for patterns. When he raised his hand, the games began. He once said, "Even gods get bored with wine and grapes," so he invented games. One was called Nox Caelestis, the celestial night. During this event, lights were extinguished. Everyone in the room was stripped, willingly or not, and blindfolded. Then came the command, "Let desire guide you, not eyes." It was chaos. I never saw what happened, but I heard it. The stumbling, the gasps, the slaps, the crying. Those who disobeyed were taken to the eastern cliffside and made to kneel at sunrise. They never returned. Tiberius's obsession with mythological reenactments intensified. One year, during the festival of Lupercalia, he forced an entire troupe of performers to recreate the rape of Europa. With him as the bull, he crawled on all fours. Painted horns were tied to his temples. The Europa he selected was a Greek boy no older than 10. No one clapped at the end, but we all smiled. We all pretended. Because real tears were invisible on Capri. Those who attended these ceremonies too often developed a strange look, a quiet stillness in their faces. The kind of emptiness seen in statues worn smooth by time. We called it the Caprini mask. They walked slowly, they blinked less, they reacted to nothing unless commanded. Some called it obedience. I called it spiritual death. One of the worst nights was when Tiberius summoned us all to the atrium of echoes. The floor was glass. Beneath it, nude slaves were arranged in grotesque poses, laying silently, painted gold, like living sculptures. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting everything infinitely. He said it was a demonstration of eternity. Then he told us to strip, even the senators, even the priests, and we did. Because we understood something by then. Tiberius didn't crave pleasure anymore. He craved obedience through humiliation. I remember one elderly poet, a once famous man from Hispania. He refused. He simply said, "No." The room froze. Tiberius smiled and said, "Then let us make him immortal." They dragged him to the mosaic chamber. 2 days later, his body was found coated in wax, suspended from the ceiling like a grotesque candle. And a new statue was unveiled that week, of Apollo, its face, identical to the poet's, immortal, indeed. The worst part, it worked. Tiberius's fear infected every corner of the empire. No one spoke ill of him. No one challenged him. Senators prostrated themselves. Governors sent gifts. Even the Praetorian Guard grew silent, watchful, afraid. He had become more than a man. He had become a symbol of perversion without consequence, of power with no God above it. And I continued to serve, to clean, to watch. Because by then, I had seen what happened to those who tried to leave. They vanished, not just from the island, from memory. You'd think that once I escaped Capri, the nightmare would end. But it never really does. Capri is not just a place. It's a condition, a poison, a permanent stain on the soul. And for those of us who survived, there's only one word for what remained: guilt. When Tiberius finally left the island, or rather, was carried away from it, bloated, half dead, stinking of wine and rot, I thought I would breathe again. But freedom doesn't come when the tyrant dies. It comes when the memory fades, and memory, I would learn, is eternal. I wandered through Rome after his departure like a ghost among citizens who had no idea what had taken place at Villa Iobis. They saw only the marble busts, the coins, the stoic paintings. To them, Tiberius was a shrewd politician, a man of restraint, a general who secured Rome's borders. And those of us who knew, we were silent, because we had no proof. Because if we spoke, we wouldn't be believed. Because speaking meant exposing ourselves, admitting what we had seen. And worse, what we had allowed. The others, my fellow servants, guards, cupbearers, musicians, they scattered across the empire like seeds blown from a corpse flower. Some disappeared entirely. Some turned to religion. Others went mad. There was Lucius, who once played the lyre for Tiberius during his divine rituals. I found him years later in Corinth, barefoot, wandering the streets muttering, "He's still watching." There was Cassia, a former kitchen girl, who drowned herself in the Tiber after having dreams of marble mounds chewing screaming children. Capri doesn't let go. It marks you. I kept trying to live like I hadn't seen the emperor snarl like a beast, while forcing to chained lovers to perform for his amusement. I tried to forget the echo of children's footsteps running down the stone halls, followed by silence. I tried, but forgetting evil isn't a decision. It's a defiance of memory, and memory never forgives. Worse still was the realization that Rome itself didn't want the truth. When Gaius, Caligula, rose to power, the people cheered. The Senate wept with joy. They welcomed the heir of the perverse. A man raised in those same Capri halls, suckled not just by nurses, but by corruption. When I saw him parade through Rome, wearing a golden robe and calling himself a god, I knew the cycle had begun again. The island had birthed a new monster. And the people, they had learned nothing. Capri's curse is not what it does to the body, it's what it does to your sense of justice. After Tiberius, I stopped believing in punishment. I stopped believing in heaven, in gods, in judgment. Because I had seen the opposite of judgment, celebration. Rome rewarded him. Historians defended him. Poets romanticized him. They spoke of his withdrawal from politics as wisdom. They praised his caution. No one spoke of the children thrown from cliffs. No one wrote of the screams from underground chambers. They preferred the myth of the emperor, not the man. I eventually fled to Egypt. I changed my name, became a scribe. I buried the truth under layers of ink and papyrus, rewriting census records instead of memories. But even here, across the sea, far from Rome's marble towers, I find myself waking in the middle of the night, convinced I hear sandals on stone, whispers behind curtains, a laurel crown placed on my chest. Some say evil dies with the tyrant, but Tiberius didn't die. He transformed into fear, into silence, into the part of us that knows the truth and still looks away. And that, I believe, is the real legacy of Capri, not the perverse acts, but the emptiness left behind. They called him Caprinius Senex, the old goat. It was supposed to be a jest, a little cruel whisper through the corridors of power, but the name stuck because it was true. He had become more beast than man, and yet, even goats die, even monsters fall. And I was there when the empire exhaled its filth. The final days of Tiberius were not grand or poetic. They were ugly, like the life he had led. His body had become a collapsing shrine to his own indulgence. Liver swollen, breath foul, skin papery and yellowed by time and toxins. He stayed mostly in his bed at Villa Lucullus, far from Capri, but never far from its ghosts. The room reeked of vinegar, urine and decay. He demanded no one touch him. He screamed at shadows. He swore he saw the eyes of Augustus judging him from the ceiling, and the faces of children in the curtains. I stood at the door during his last night, a silent witness like so many times before. He writhed under his sheets, clutching his ring with trembling fingers. He muttered names of boys long buried, of senators long exiled, of gods he once mocked. He kept asking for a girl, Petra, a name none of us recognized. At one point, he screamed, "Do not let them throw me from the cliff again." Then he laughed. Then he sobbed. And then the laughing turned into choking. A physician entered, followed by Caligula, who was already measuring the room, with his eyes like a butcher sizing up a carcass. Tiberius's last words, I'm told, were, "Will no one help me stand?" No one moved. Not I, not Caligula. Not even the physician, who knew it would be political suicide to extend the life of a man the empire was eager to forget. And so the old goat choked on his own blood and silence. But what came next was worse than death. It was removal. His statues were quietly taken down from public places. Coins with his face were melted. His name was buried beneath the new narrative, one of continuity, of restoration, of a shining young emperor with divine blood and golden curls. The empire did what it always did best, rewrite. And yet, in private, his depravity became legend. Roman mothers would whisper to their daughters, "If you do not behave, Tiberius will call for you." Senators, in their drunken revelries, would joke about swimming with the minnows, but I never laughed. Because I remember the real faces, the real screams, the real hands, gripping marble edges as they were dragged below the waves. In time, I wrote this account not as revenge, but as a record. Because history, if left to poets and politicians, will sanitize monsters into misunderstood men. They'll say he was reclusive, private, tragic. They'll ignore the trauma economy he built on a mountain above the sea. They'll say it was exaggerated, propaganda from his enemies. And maybe they'll be right to doubt, after all, who would believe that one man could be so perverse, so protected, and so adored by Rome itself? Who would believe a servant? But I do not need belief, I need truth. And here it is, the emperor did not fall, he was lifted, celebrated, and embalmed in glory, while those he ruined were erased, one by one, until only the stones remembered them. And even the stones, I think, weep. So I leave this final truth to you, reader, viewer, heir to this Roman bloodline. If a man like Tiberius can rule 4 decades, if an empire can keep his secrets, then what does that say of the empire, of power, of us?